Hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the webinar. My name is Victoria Shakespeare and I'm a Senior Brand Manager here at Fuel Cycle. Today we'll be talking about connecting the P2 engine and SurveyGizmo for Agile Insights, which is presented by Johnny Anderson, who most of you know, but Johnny is the Customer Success Manager here at Fuel Cycle. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. All of you are automatically muted. If you have any questions during the session, please put them in the Q&A box in your control panel. And if you'd like to chat, you can just drop a chat in there in the chat panel as well. And now without further ado, we'll turn the time over to Johnny. And I think you're muted, Johnny.
Yes, thank you. That would help. And thanks, Victoria. Yeah, thanks everyone on the line. Excited to be able to talk about this helpful resources with you. So wanted to start off just by doing a very brief overview of the P2 engine and progressive profiling. And this is a conversation that either your customer success manager or your account lead or research team can assist you with if this sort of general conversation would be of use for you. But essentially, the P2 engine allows you to automatically have updated member profile information, whether you collect that via surveys or any sort of self-reported tool that the members provide you, or via manual information that you append to their profiles. So any valuable profile information that you, again, can have members self-report to you or that you have already pre-collected can be mapped to their profiles to be automatically updated. So as you can see to the visual on the right here, whether that's from surveys, from your CRM, from profile data that they've given you, group information, you name it, it's all housed in what we call the P2 engine, which stands for progressive profiling. And one of the powers of the P2 engine is that you can take this data that is collected or appended on member profiles and use that to really enrich SurveyGizmo surveys in particular. And having a lot of these conversations with several of my clients, understanding that these sort of shortcuts or use cases for how you can leverage the P2 engine with SurveyGizmo comes in handy in several different ways, including the ability to cut data, filter data, and use that pre-populated data in your survey builds and reports without having to re-ask those questions. So for example, the bottom note here says that your P2 engine data can be pushed to SurveyGizmo. So let's say for your community, you have a profiler survey that collects all of the various demographic information that you want to have on your members: gender, income, ethnicity, number of children, you name it. If you have profile points built from those question sources, you can have those passed to SurveyGizmo, anonymized of course, so that it will always be appended to their survey responses, so that you don't ever have to ask those questions again. Bear in mind that the P2 engine does allow you to keep updated information. So let's say you refield these profiler surveys once a year and do re-ask those questions, you can set it so the new version of those same questions can replace the previous one. For example, and let's say in January of this year, you asked everybody in a series of questions, basic demographics, including income. And let's say next January, you want to see if their income has changed. So you can re-ask that question in a new profiler and have their new answer supersede and replace the previous one. And either way, all of that data can be pushed into SurveyGizmo, so you can really utilize it without having to re-ask questions or having sort of any missing or gaps, if you will, in some of the data. So this sort of just a little bit of a primer. Again, your account team can definitely go over some of these details with you if you have any sort of residual questions from this. What today's session is mainly going to focus on is less on what the P2 engine is, but how you can actually use it to enrich your SurveyGizmo surveys. So wanted to focus on this sort of pre-filled checklist, if you will, and then we'll move into sort of a workshopping session where we can really show you how exactly you would pull in your profile points and group data into SurveyGizmo. So the main note here is that you will need to plan ahead because unlike certain other survey providers, profile points and group data cannot be pushed into SurveyGizmo retroactively. Meaning that if you field a survey on Monday and then realize as you're seeing the responses Tuesday and Wednesday that you're like, oh, you know what, we need to cut the data by income. But if income had not been collected prior to that survey, we unfortunately wouldn't be able to pull it into the SurveyGizmo reports themselves or within the survey builds. Those profile points and groups would need to be built prior to the survey being filled. So we have sort of these three items on this checklist that you'll always want to make sure that you can sort of tick off before your survey actually goes in field. So the first being, is my profile point or group already built? Again, if you want to make sure that they're available in SurveyGizmo for these various usage, you will want to make sure that it is built beforehand. The second is that, is the profile point or group programmed to be pushed to SurveyGizmo? We have a little screenshot here of what the specific area of your group or profile point will include. And it just, like it says here, is labeled as push data to external source. And so when it comes to pushing that specific group or profile point to SurveyGizmo, you will want to make sure that that box is checked so that the SurveyGizmo tool will know to sync this data amongst each other. And the last is on the P2 engine page, there is a refresh data button at the top, and you will always want to hit this button when you make changes to anything in your P2 engine, whether that's creating new ones, archiving old ones, or updating profile points with new question sources. And we'll sort of show you again where all these are located in the back end when we jump in. Lastly, a few recommendations as we sort of go forward with this. We recommend having a reference sheet, particularly for the naming conventions that are specific to your community. The way that we're going to show you how we pull this in will require very particular spellings and capitalizations and spacings. So having a reference sheet as you're pulling this in will definitely come in handy. You can do this one of two ways. You can either download an export of your survey data from SurveyGizmo, which we're definitely going to recommend initially. And after you're sort of leveraging these types of resources ongoing, you can work with your field cycle team to create what I sometimes call a P2 engine cheat sheet, which can look a little bit like what you see here below, where it could be an Excel or a Word file that just has the correct naming conventions with spacing and spelling and capitalization involved, with the variable name and what the different answer value options are, because they will need to be exact in order for this to work. And so having a easily referenced one source for that information is definitely going to be beneficial. So without further ado, I'm going to hop into our actual demo community here where we can sort of see some of this in action. So again, we'll start off with making sure that your profile points are built. So this is going to be in the Members tab, Manage Members, and then in the P2 engine. So we have some profile points that have been built here. So this is again where you go to build those out. We'll want to make sure that in each of the profile points, when we scroll down to push data to external source, that the push to survey providers option is checked off. And then lastly, if we update, add new, or revise any, we'll want to make sure we hit this refresh data button before we make any changes and before the survey goes in field. So without further ado, we're going to launch into SurveyGizmo, which for the sake of your own community will be on your homepage, and you hit launch SurveyGizmo here. I have my survey open here, which we'll use for the examples that we're going to go over today. So I also have my cheat sheet that I created just with some of the profile points that I'm going to be using here. But again, for your own reference sheet, you can go to results and exports. And what you'll want to do is, just for the sake of having a reference point prior to the cheat sheet being made, you can just pull a new export. And what you want to do is just make sure you hit include URL variables. This is what SurveyGizmo calls your profile points in your groups. So you can just hit create report, and what that's going to do is generate an Excel that you can use as your reference point. Just for the sake of best practices, I typically will just go to filter and uncheck test responses, just because we won't really need that for our reference sheet. Depending on how large the survey is or how many responses you got to it, may take a few seconds to a few moments. but we will download this Excel just so you can see what it would look like from a perspective of how we would pull this information. So here is our test data that we have with the responses here. And then you'll see in the first few columns that we have all of our URL variables. And so when we're talking about the variable name, you will see them all located as URL variable colon, and then what the actual name is. And then the answer values are all of the different columns, rows beneath the actual column header. So this is what you'll want to use as your reference point prior to your P2 Engine cheat sheet being made with you or for you. This is the one I've gone ahead and put together for myself, using this as a reference for our conversation today, but I used that sheet, the survey exports as the reference point for how I actually compiled these. So let's start off with how you would pull in for quotas. So there may be instances of whether or not you're fielding this to your community or to an outside sample. But if you want to establish strict quotas on how many people can fit a certain category before you don't collect any more responses in that category, you'll want to navigate to Tools and then Quotas. And then from here, it'll be a very similar process across all of our examples that we'll go over here, but we'll hit Create Quota, and then we'll want to do Logic Quota. So let's say we want to limit the amount of responses for some of our profile points that we have here. I'm going to exit out of this Excel here. Let's say we want to limit the gender responses to be half and half, male and female, because we want a very even split. So what we'll want to do is keep this here for reference, but we'll want to name our first quota, let's say female responses. Let's say our total base size that we're trying to get for the survey is 500. So we'll limit this to 250 responses. And this is where we're going to actually pull in that P2 Engine data. So under Logic, we'll hit Select Condition. And if you scroll down under First Party Data, you'll have this option here. It says URL variable. And then you'll have two fields. The first is the variable name, and the last is going to be what the answer value option is going to be associated with. So for the sake of this, we'll want to pull in our exact naming convention for gender, which in this case is just the word gender with the lowercase g. We'll always leave the operational field as is exactly equal to, because we won't want any variations of. And then because this is for female quota, we'll want to pull in female here. And we'll hit Save Quota. And it's as easy as that. And so again, as long as you have gender collected as a profile point beforehand, SurveyGizmo will automatically pull in that profile data with the member response going into this survey, and it will automatically know whether or not they have male or female, in this case, marked in their profile. And so the quota will fill or not fill accordingly. And so you would just repeat that process for a male quota. So we'll do male responses. Set it at 250 again. Go down to Select Condition, URL variable, pull up our cheat sheet here, bring gender again. This time pulling in male. And so now we have both of our quotas here. As you can see, the platform is catching up. So with the responses that we have pre-collected, the quotas will then auto readjust based off of the quotas that we had. So these will work retroactively as long as all the data is pre-populated beforehand. Perfect. So that's how we pull it in for quotas. Now let's say you want to pull it in within the survey build itself. So we have this very short survey that's 2 questions. And let's say we initially want to field this to everybody, but as we're programming, we're realizing, well, this is a lengthy survey. It's 20 questions, and we have 1 question we want to add, but we only want to display it to specific groups. Let's say in this case, marital status. We have a variety of questions, and we only want this 1 specific question to display only to single people, because the data is only going to be relevant for them. But if you don't ask marital status in this survey, you have it pre-collected via your profile points, this is where, again, you can pull that in. So let's say the second question on what is your favorite movie genre is only going to be relevant for single people. So we can do a very similar process with the page display logic. So we'll find the page that contains the question that we want to have logic to, and we'll go ahead and edit this page here. Very similarly, we'll go into logic. And again, this process will look familiar. We'll go to select a condition, find URL variable, and we'll go back to our cheat sheet to find that variable name. In this case is marital status. And then in the last field, we'll want to pull in our answer option that's relevant for us, which is single. Add that here, and then we'll save that page. As you can see, the display logic has been added. So that means that any member that has single under the marital status profile point appended to their profiles will see this question, and anybody who does not have that answer value appended under marital status to their profiles will not see this question. So these can work either in tandem with the quotas or completely separate, but good for use cases like this where you have several questions or one in the survey that are only going to be particular to a specific segment based off of those profile points. So the last two we want to go over are relating to your SurveyGizmo reports. So let's say you don't necessarily have quotas and you don't need to utilize display logic for the questions themselves, but you are interested in pulling in that information within the reports themselves. Seeing different segment data cuts or filtering the entire report by this could be some good use cases. Best practices that we have just in general for SurveyGizmo reports is to at least add one filter in general, which is just by response status, and filtering only to complete so that you're not seeing partial, disqualified, or test data. But let's sort of start off with filters here. So this is going to filter the entire SurveyGizmo report, literally every single question based off of a specific profile point or group filter that you would like. So we'll go ahead and do a similar process. In this case, we're going to hit add filter and do create advanced filter. And in this specific frame, we'll start to look very familiar again. We'll do select condition, URL variable. In this case, we'll sort of mix it up. Maybe we want to look at the Hispanic breakout by ethnicity. So we'll pull in the variable name here, ethnicity, leave is exactly. And then we'll pull in our answer value as the last option. And we'll go ahead and save that. And what it's going to do is auto adjust the survey responses to only display those responses that fit this criteria. So as you can see, our total responses was 8, and now it's down to 2 because it's only showing responses based off of members who have the label Hispanic appended to their ethnicity profile point. So you can always build them, and if you say after the while, like, well, we kind of want to add in different filters and mix and match. Once you have them built within the survey tool, you can just uncheck it if you want to leave it there, but you don't want it to be actively displaying with your data. Similarly, you have the option to compare segments. So this will still keep the total answer options and responses across your entire report, but will give you the ability to sort of see how different groups or segments compare against one another. So in this case, this is a good opportunity for you to bring in groups that you have built within your field cycle community. So let's say you have profile points that are all combined into a single group. Let's say you have a group of people that is millennial game console users. So you have a profile point that is on age, you have one that is based off of consoles used, and then one that is based off of frequency of how they use that console. You can use the dynamic grouping feature to mix and match the criteria for that specific group. And like with profile points, which we'll toggle back to here, in the P2 engine, you can also pull in group data. So I sort of made these two test groups for our conversation here called movie group 1 and movie group 2 as static groups. But you can also pull in dynamic groups that combine multiple profile points into a single area. And similarly to profile points, you can also push group data into SurveyGizmo. So if you need something a little bit more complex to segment your data by, this is going to be a great way for you to do that. So let's see what the different segment tools would look like. So very similarly to the filters, we'll go ahead and hit add segment and then create advanced segment. You do need to give this one a name, so that way you're able to distinguish which one is going to be which. So in this case, because I have my 2 movie groups, I'll call this movie group 1. You do have the option to display a specific color for the responses. I'll select 2 differing colors just so you can see what the difference would look like from a visual perspective. So we'll choose like this deep blue, and then we'll hit edit logic. So again, similarly, we'll go to select condition, URL variable, and then we'll want to pull the group name. So as you can see, the difference between profile points and groups is that your groups, whether they're static or dynamic, are going to have this group line moniker at the beginning. And then you'll want to reference either from your SurveyGizmo export or from a cheat sheet that your account team works with you on what the naming convention is going to be. And then true or false are the only 2 answer values that are going to be linked with group affiliation. True, meaning they are a member of that group. False, meaning they are not a member of that group. So we'll want to pull in the group 1 segment here as the variable name. And then for the answer value option, we'll want to pull in true because we want to look at people who actually are in this group. So once that looks set up fine on the left, we'll hit save. And what that's going to do is give us a breakout of everybody in this group by all the different answer options for each of the questions. So it comes in handy when you're able to sort of compare it across 2 or more segments. So we'll go ahead and add that second movie group so we could see what the differences look like. We'll call this one movie group 2. We'll make this one like a deep red. Going to edit logic, select condition, URL variable. This time the name will be group movie 2. And we'll do the same thing again, pulling in true because we want members who are going to be in this group. Then we'll hit save, and then we'll have them side by side so that for every question and every answer value, we're able to see a segment comparison to see how the answer options broke out. So it looks like for most of this, it is an even split across them, which may or may not be significant for your needs, but at least gives you an indication of sort of how this is all sort of breaking out by these groups. Again, similarly to how you can create them and then choose to not display them after the fact, you can do that by just checking or unchecking the visibility boxes over here on the left. So that's sort of the gist of how you leverage P2 engine data for all of those different areas. Again, including within quota builds, within the survey build, if you're wanting to pull in your P2 engine data for display logic with actual questions, and then how you can pull them in either for filters across the entire report or as comparable segments within your reports as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and pause to see if there are any questions or any follow-ups anybody would like to address.
Thank you so much, Johnny. It looks like we just had a question come in. Anyone, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A or the chat box, and we'll address as many as we can. So Karen asked, do these segments / audiences need to be created in FC before you field the survey too?
In which platform? I'm sorry.
In Fuel Cycle before you field the survey.
FC, yes. Yes, so like with profile points, groups also do need to be built in Fuel Cycle beforehand. And then similarly to the profile points, it does need to be checked off as being pushed to SurveyGizmo beforehand. Otherwise, the SurveyGizmo platform will not sync them. Again, the survey itself can be built already. It just can't have survey responses collected yet. So it just needs to be built and pushed before the survey actually goes in field. I know the order and specifics of that can seem a little daunting at times, but again, the survey itself can be built prior to the groups or profile points. It just cannot be in field prior to the groups or profile points being built.
Great, thank you. So another question, Perry asked, when we are testing our surveys before launch, how do we make sure that the display logic questions that are tied to a URL variable are actually displaying correctly before launch? Since we as testers slash creators do not have a profile or URL variables assigned to us for testing?
Yeah, so there is a way to create test member accounts that do meet specific criteria. Obviously, it may seem a little cumbersome to create multiple test accounts if there's going to be multiple paths, right? So this question's only for women, this one's only for this specific buyer segment, things like that. In the test module as well, I believe there are options to also include URL variables here. And so you can sort of run through and say, like, let's include how the URL variable is going to be included here. And so if there are particular use cases for that, then we'll want to just input that in this specific area while you're testing. And then of course, hitting fire actions to make sure that the logic will flow appropriately.
Awesome. Thank you, Johnny. And it looks like we have one more question. Jennifer asks, is there a way to generate a table based on P2 data? So for example, rather than segment by male or female, see a chart that shows the percentage of all respondents that are male and the percent female?
Yes. So when we go back into the reports here, what you can do outside of just doing the segments themselves is you'll see at sort of any point, above or below certain questions, you can hit this insert button. And from here, you can do question charts or sort of overall inserts. In this case, you can hit URL, SSO, and hidden values. And so from here, you can actually pull in those same URL variables. In this case, doesn't actually require you to sort of build out those custom naming conventions. It will pull this in for you. And sort of, well, let's do gender since that was sort of the example here. And we'll do add question. And while it's populating, should give you an output here of what the total breakout is going to be for this specific survey. So it looks like of the 8 responses we got in this survey, 5 were female and 3 were male. And so we do have sort of an overall breakout here as well. And you can put these at sort of any place in the survey. So let's say you're sending out this report to a stakeholder that would want to see the gender breakout above a particular question. It doesn't need to go at the top. You can insert those at any point throughout the survey report.
Awesome. Great. If anyone has any questions, we'll give you like a few minutes or probably a few seconds to add them. And with that, we'll probably end. Let's see. Yeah, nothing's coming in. So I think we're good. Thank you so much, Johnny, for all your time. We'll send out the recording to this webinar this afternoon or early tomorrow morning. And we'll also be sending a bunch of really helpful resources for the P2 engine. And if you have any questions, please reach out to Johnny or your account manager. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. We'll chat soon.